right now. So when we talk about the curriculum here at the gym, the first principle that I always teach, the main thing is aliveness, okay? And for those of you that have trained with me before, that'll be redundant, but for those of you that haven't, that's really the main point. If that is the number one principle within your gym or your training group, then everything else will follow in line perfectly. The attitude, the vibe of the gym, the fact that everybody's going to be cool to each other, there's not going to be any dicks there trying to hurt each other, the fact that everything you do will be functional, the fact that you will progress in terms of performance, which is the only thing that matters. Your performance is going to get better. You're not collecting certificates or how many disarms you know in your notebook, but your body is actually getting better and better at these delivery systems. All of that falls in the line if what you're doing is alive. And aliveness begins from day one. You don't train for 2 years, or you don't start with dead patterns and then evolve to aliveness. That's not only unnecessary, it's counterproductive. So everything we do begins and ends with aliveness. That's the number one thing. For something to be alive, basically, the general simplistic answer is it has to have timing, energy, and motion. If it's in a pattern, there's no timing. Okay? A pattern is designed for you to know what comes next. So you've taken timing out of the equation, and it won't translate directly against a resisting opponent. So we must have a natural sense of timing, okay? Energy is not some fucking hippie bullshit chi. I'm not talking about that. When I talk about energy, I'm talking about resistance. Okay, so like when Carl was working the stab program here with you guys today, he's talking about this is somebody's going to come and stick you, and this is what it feels like for a 2-on-1, and you guys are pushing and pulling and moving each other around. That's energy, okay? Contrast that now, for those of you that have been around martial arts a little bit, that training and what it looked like at the end of the class here today for the stab program. Contrast that with the typical martial arts demonstration, where the dude starts 6 feet away, with the freaking stabs you like this and locks his hand out, and the other guy chops and does that, and does his Aikido wrist lock or Kali lock flow. That's not energy. That's a demonstration. It's a choreographed move. Looks cool for movies, has absolutely zero application when it comes to defending yourself in the street. And it will actually be counterproductive. You're training yourself what not to do. Why are you training yourself what not to do? Because if you could do it against a fight, they would do it against a fight. They can't. It won't work when it's brought into an alive environment. It doesn't. That's why it has to be done that way. The theory is always, well, we start this way and then we move it to an alive opponent, but you'll never see it. Because it doesn't work. You'll never see it at that stage. Okay, so that's energy. And motion is just that, moving around, motion. You're not standing stationary in a stance doing stab. You're moving around. Are you in a right lead or a left lead when it's going on? Who knows? You don't know where you're going to be in a clinch. You're pushing, pulling, moving each other around. People are falling. People are getting pushed up against the wall. That's the nature of fighting. So that's aliveness. Timing, energy, and motion. Every drill we do has to have that incorporated into it. It's not to say that you go from zero to sparring. That's not what we do. There's a progression. It's called the I method. You introduce the technique, you isolate the technique, and then you integrate it into an alive format. That's what Carl walked you guys through here today, basically with the stab program. Introduce a movement, practice it with resistance, but just that one movement, and then put it back into the hole at the end. So each option, what the 3 things the guy can do with a knife, then at the end, guy's practicing to do all 3, no particular pattern, and it looks ugly because that's what fights look like. It's not designed to look cool for the movies. It's designed to work for you. And we've taught this now for a while. It's part of our ISR program, which is for law enforcement, and we've had people actually use it. You know, we get feedback from the police departments and the officers that have actually used this material to save themselves or somebody else. So it's not theoretical, like I said. And when it's used, it looks like it does in here. It's not pretty. It's not like fucking Steven Seagal movie. Knife flies over there, and that's not reality. Okay? So that's aliveness. That's number one. Second principle is adaptability. And again, really basic idea of that is that you have to have, when we're talking about empty hands, stand-up, clinch, and ground game. You can't just have one. You have to have all 3. Okay? Notice I didn't say trapping. I think he gave you kind of an idea of that with the hubud. Actual fight, what happens is striking and then clinch. Attached or unattached striking, and then clinches. Attached or unattached striking with takedowns and throws. That's reality. There's no trapping in that formula. So stand-up, clinch, and ground. And there's a couple other principles that give you the broader perspective of adaptability. The first one I wrote up here is circumstances dictate tactics. So people ask all the time, well, should I do this or should I do that? Should I do this? Depends on the circumstances. Okay, the totality of circumstances will dictate your reaction. I don't know what you should do based on the situation. Okay? You train your body to have that skill in those delivery systems, and then those delivery systems translate to the different areas. So if you see here, I wrote this square, and inside that square I wrote one delivery system, BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay? Each corner you see 4 aspects of it. You have the gi art, okay, on the top left corner. And then next to that it has no-gi. Those are two different sports. Okay, there's some guys that are really good at no-gi, put a gi on them and they're not even a blue belt. Some guys are awesome at gi, have a hard time translating to no-gi. So they're two distinct sports. Okay, so you have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with a gi, you have no-gi. Down here you have Vale Tudo. That's no-gi with striking. That's mixed martial arts, essentially. Okay, that's where mixed martial arts came from. And then in the bottom corner, it's self-defense. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu translates to all four of those aspects, but the delivery system, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the square, is always the same. The root movements, the mount position is the same in a parking lot as it is in a mixed martial arts arena, as it is on the mat in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament. Same mount position. The escapes from mount position, guess what? They're the same. The mistakes you make from mount position, guess what? They're the same. Venue changes. So circumstances will dictate your tactics, but the delivery system remains constant, and that's a very important point. Okay? Second rule is plans change upon contact. Number one rule. So it's nice to have theory and a plan, but as soon as contact is made with your opponent, we get into C. We've gone from A to B to C. We're actually into the contact range. It's all alive. It's not going to be a process of conscious thought. Something else takes over. Okay? And your training now will dictate what occurs. And it's easy from the outside to play armchair quarterback and say what the person should do or shouldn't do, but circumstances will dictate those tactics, and plans will change upon contact. So what do you do if you can't plan for every situation? That's the problem with scenario training. Again, getting back to the combatives guys that try and train, they put on plays and we put a table here and a chair, and Dave's going to yell at me and call me a bitch, and I'm going to pretend to hit me with a bottle, and then John's going to run behind me and try and sucker punch me in the head, and we're going to practice our scenario. And you can play that game for 6 months or a year, practice that, but you know what happens? After you've done that 3 or 4 times, you figure out that the guys in here that have the best delivery systems that stand up, clinch, and ground always win the scenarios too. They always come out on top in those scenarios. Guess why? Because they have that skill in those delivery systems. But what should they do in each given? Imagine if I tried to imagine every single particular situation, violent situation I could find myself in. I'm sitting with my back against the wall. Okay, now I'm at a table with 4 people. All right, now I'm walking into a restaurant. Fucking hell, it'd be impossible. Okay, so plans change upon contact. You can't plan for that. So the best thing you could do, again, goes back full circle, basic skill in the delivery systems. Train your body. And that gets me to the 4 qualities of a really good fighter. Okay, and the first 2 qualities make up 75% of what a good fighter is, and that is aggression and conditioning. I could name a few mixed martial arts fighters right now, but I'm not going to. But I could name a few that actually have very low skill level and very low intelligence. The second 2 qualities, because I know them personally, okay? But they're in great shape and they're very aggressive, and that makes them tough. They're tough opponents. They can get in the cage and they can do well because they're aggressive and they're in good shape. That's 3/4 of the game. If you go after the person and you're very aggressive and you're in good shape and your body's in good shape, strong, conditioned, you have wind, you have cardio, you have anaerobic capacity, you're going to be tough. You're going to be tough for anybody to deal with. You're going to be ripping and pulling out of things and thrashing about, and you're going to hurt somebody just on that. You combine that now with number 3, which is skill. Skill in what? The basic delivery systems, because we can't plan for every circumstance. Okay, so we have basic skill in stand-up, clinch, and ground, and followed by intelligence. Intelligence always helps. Okay, otherwise you'll do stupid errors, and your performance won't go as high as it could if you're not smart the way you train. Those are the 4 qualities: aggression, conditioning, skill, and intelligence. That's what you want to have. Doesn't matter whether or not we're talking about with a gi, with no gi, with volley tudo, or self-defense. Delivery system is the same. Those qualities are the same.
About skill and conditioning, it's easy to train, but how about aggression?
Aggression is going to come out as part of your training on the mat. And by aggression, I'm not talking about blind rage where you just go after somebody. That's not what I mean by aggression. What I mean by aggression is you're going to continue and not quit. Okay? So in my book, before we went to lunch, right, we had Dave go through a couple mixed martial arts matches. Okay? In my book, Dave was aggressive. There may have been points in that match where he rested, or he was on top here, or he was on bottom, and he had to catch his breath or whatever. That falls in category 4, which is intelligence. Because if he just went apeshit the whole time, he would have gassed and probably tapped out, right? But he was aggressive because he didn't quit. And you develop that on the mat. Who can teach you about that? Can I teach you about that? No. Who can teach you whether or not you're going to quit? Can you learn that from me? No. You can only teach yourself about that, and you do it through rolling on the mat and sparring like we did before we went to lunch. What's that again? Root skill in those basic delivery systems. That's what it all comes down to. You work the basics. You're introduced to the basics. You isolate those basics and practice them, and then you spend years mastering those basics. Like the judo club here, the judo guys that you watch at the Olympic level. Most Olympic level judo players, they have 1 or 2 throws that they're good at that they hit in competition. That's it. 1 or 2. 20 years, 1 or 2. That's what they're good at. And you'll see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters at the top level, gi or no gi, they'll have a couple moves that they're slick at that maybe are new, but their fundamental basics are solid, and that's why they can do those moves. They've spent years doing those basic moves. When you see Hickson doing an armbar from mount, it's the same armbar you're going to learn tomorrow or that we're going to do from mount. Lennox Lewis throws the same left jab I throw, just a lot better. See, so how did he get good at that? By spending years and years and years doing that jab. So you want to defend against a knife, you take these basics that Carl showed you, and you have to put in hours and hours and hours of practicing this against a live opponent, like you did before the end of class. How can you do that if you're not in shape? You'll never be able to get there, because you're going to gas. Well, okay, when you do it for like 30 seconds, and then you want to talk, and whatever, and then you come back the next day. And there's a lot of martial artists like that. That's fine. Just be honest with yourself and understand that you're not doing anything functional. Because if you want to actually be able to apply it, you need to be able to come into the gym and spend an hour working on that 2-on-1 when somebody's trying to fight you back. That requires conditioning. So again, just to bring it all back, that's the whole point. Street, competition, doesn't matter. Delivery systems are the same. And the healthy route, like Carl was saying, and like I told you guys before you go to lunch, the healthy route mentally and physically is the route that I'm offering you. There's 2 different routes there. You can decide to get into martial arts and take this route where everything you do is going to be alive and where you're going to be working against resisting opponents, and whether you're the instructor or the coach or whatever, you're going to get on the mat with everybody else and you're going to spar and train with everybody else in that environment, and performance counts. And you just do the best you can, and you come back the next day and the next day and the next day, and it's athletic. And that way is an upward spiral where you're going to get more confidence and you're going to enjoy yourself, and it's fun for everybody. The other route is you're paranoid and scared, so you get in martial arts, but you don't want to get on the mat because you don't want to have to tap out to anybody, and you don't want to spar because you don't want to get punched in the head, and you want to look like it looks in the movies like Steven Seagal, and you don't want to get touched, and you want to practice all these movements. So you acquire a bunch of disarms, and you acquire a bunch of lock flows, and you acquire all this information, and you give yourself a title, and you acquire a bunch of certificates, but you can't actually perform any of it, so you have to stay off the mat and just coach. And when somebody comes in and calls you on it, like John or somebody else walks in the door and asks if you want to roll, you're going to have an attitude about it because you know you can't do it, and you're going to be a dick. So you go from being scared and paranoid on a downward spiral to being more scared and more paranoid. So it's actually